Isles of the Emberdark by Brandon Sanderson is a lore-rich expansion to the ever-expanding Cosmere. This book was technically released last year on Brandon Sanderson's official website as the official Dragonsteel Deluxe Edition, as well as the ebook. So technically this book has been out for a while, but the official tour release just hit bookstores on February 3rd, 2026. And some people may be wondering if they can or should pick it up. If you watched my 2026 Cosmere Reading Order video, you would know that I recommend Isles of the Emberdark pretty late in the game, but that doesn't mean you can't read this book on its own. It is seen as a standalone, just like Tress of the Emerald Sea, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, or even Warbreaker. It can technically be read at any time, but if you want to read the full Cosmere, I still think this works best toward the end of the saga, with all the hidden messages involved adding to the excitement. There are a lot of things in this book that might confuse you at first, but Brandon Sanderson has written this in a way where you should be able to follow along with what happens. While there is certainly a lot to enjoy for newcomers, knowing about the Cosmere beforehand will give you a better experience with this book. Isles of the Emberdark is an expansion to a short story Brandon wrote back in the early 2010s called Sixth of the Dusk. I really enjoyed the original story of Six of the Dusk during my first Cosmere read, so when I heard Isles of the Emberdark was going to expand upon that, I was excited to revisit the world and see where Dusk and Vathi were heading. And I certainly did get that story, but I also got so much more. And for those of you wondering, yes, Isles of the Emberdark does make Sixth of the Dusk repetitive in my opinion. The entire Sixth of the Dusk short story is the first part of Isles of the Emberdark. It's included almost word for word, with a couple of minor changes here and there to make it fit the new story narrative. A little treat that I had when reading this book, not knowing exactly what was going to happen, I didn't expect to spend most of the book in Shadesmar, a kind of realm between realms for those of you who aren't familiar with the Cosmere. We not only get to learn more about Dusk, but we also learn more about Yolen, dragons, and the cognitive realm, and take a deeper dive into the future of the Cosmere as a whole, even getting a better look at future Scadrians and a glimpse of a future Rosharan. I'm going to be speaking in pretty Cosmere-heavy terms for the rest of this video, but I'll try to give descriptions for those of you who aren't familiar with what's going to be talked about, because fantasy can sometimes be a little hard to keep up with if you aren't familiar with the worlds. So, who are our main characters? In this book, we follow two main POVs. We of course follow Dusk from the planet First of the Sun, who is quickly becoming a relic of a dying past. Dusk is what's known as a trapper, and his job is to capture and raise AVR, which are invested birds that can alter someone's perception. And we follow Starling, who is the captain of the Dynamic Storyteller's Incredible Conveyance, or the Dynamic for short. And she's the apprentice to Hoid, and also a dragon. I think she's the first main POV in a Cosmere book who is a dragon. At least as far as I know. Dusk has two AVR with him throughout the book. Roke, who can form a Nile bond with humans and grant a talent that cloaks from mental attacks and intrusions similar to a smoker on Scadrial. And Sack, who can show Dusk visions of his possible deaths in the near future, allowing Dusk to tip the scales of fate in his favor. Dusk is watching his world move forward, and with the rise of technology, the need for trappers and expert navigators like him seem to be becoming obsolete. Dusk himself, who is possibly one of the best trappers alive, went from navigating Patji, one of the deadliest islands on his planet, to essentially hosting field trips at a zoo, where he tells kids about the dangers of some of the deadly wildlife he himself had to survive every day. All while they watch said deadly wildlife safely through a window. Dusk gets the feeling he's losing his purpose, but he tries his best to find his place in this new unfamiliar world that doesn't really seem to need him anymore. We also follow Starling, or also known as Illistandrista. Starling is a fairly young dragon, at the age of, I think, 87? I can't find where I read her age, but she's around 80 to 87 years old. And Starling isn't necessarily on good terms with the dragons right now. When she was around 75 years old, she took a stand against her elders because of her own moral convictions. As punishment for this, she was given manacles that harness her own investiture against her and prevent her from transforming into her draconic form. She also can't visit the spirit shores or use any other draconic power. And for those of you wondering what investiture is, that's essentially the Cosmere version of magic. And as I said earlier, Starling is also an apprentice to Hoid, my favorite world hopper. A lot of our favorite world hoppers, but Hoid isn't really around. In typical Hoid fashion, he did his job and kind of screwed off, seemingly. So Starling now leads his former crew on the Dynamic, traveling through Shadesmar and searching for Dromonad's secret perpendicularity. You can think of a perpendicularity as kind of a hole a god or a shard left behind that can grant them entrance into another dimension, sort of like that. About the story. Scadrians have made their way to First of the Sun by means of space travel. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Cosmere, Scadrians come from the planet Scadrial, which is the planet Mistborn takes place on. So Scadrians being Scadrians, they want to colonize the planet and get Vathi and her other locals to allow them to come in. They essentially want to progress their planet forward, and Scadrians promise to accelerate First of the Sun's technology with their own advanced Scadrian technology. One of the big advantages of advancement in tech for this planet is the promise of interplanetary travel, but really it may have something to do with a little something else. It should come as no surprise that Dusk doesn't really trust the Scadrians and wants to prove to Vathi and his people that they don't need help from outside worlds. His logic is they have survived on their own long enough, and given enough time, they can accomplish this advancement in technology on their own. But what about the interplanetary travel? Well, by using this hidden perpendicularity on the planet, Dusk sets off through Shadesmar to prove he can navigate the Isles of the Emberdark, and they as a people can travel to the other planets on their own. But there are concerns about traveling the Isles of the Emberdark. It's terrifying. Not necessarily for you as the reader, but terrifying for anyone who is put in that situation. And I will say, some of the creatures here do fit right into a horror novel. Meanwhile, Starling is looking for that hidden perpendicularity on Dusk's homeworld to get on good terms with a dragon that we may or may not have seen before in another book. Starling as a character is good, and I don't think I can say too much about her arc without spoiling the book, but I think her POV really shines when we're learning about the lore of dragons and Shadesmar. In fact, what's fascinating to me about this story is how much we learn about different elements of the Cosmere, and how the Cosmere sort of operates in the future way past Wind and Truth or the Bands of Mourning. We learn a little about how Shadesmar works and why different perpendicularities mimic the worlds they're connected to. We get a deeper dive into the dragons and get a better feel for what dragon society is, how long they've been around, and what kind of role they play in all of this. And we even find out some new things about shards, particularly the dead ones. What I liked about the book. Obviously, the lore expansion is a huge plus for me. We all know Brandon Sanderson shines at world building, and it's honestly impressive how much he can expand upon an already fleshed out system. I also really like Dusk as a character, and related to his arc on trying to find a place in the world that seems to no longer need him. I think that hits home for me personally with the rise of AI and me trying to keep my relevance in my own fields like video, voice, and sound work, and of course writing, all of which are the first jobs AI could take away once it gets good enough. And unfortunately, we're already seeing that happening. So yes, I could relate to Dusk in a very strong way. Now, what I didn't like about the book. Some of the characters feel kind of like small potatoes. Mainly the characters flying with Starling on the dynamic. Out of 6 characters on Starling's crew, I think only 2 aside from Starling herself felt very memorable. Most of them really didn't have anything to do. Of course, Sanderson is great at bringing characters that you don't really care about to the forefront of a story, so I wouldn't be mad if I saw these characters again in the future to see how they grow and expand. But for Isles of the Emberdark, I do feel like he could have a smaller character roster and not really lose the story. I was also kind of bummed that we didn't get more of Vathi. Vathi was one of the main characters in Sixth of the Dusk, and having her kind of fizzle out after part 1 of the story was a little disappointing. But I guess she doesn't quite fit into Sanderson's vision of where the story is now heading. And finally, this one isn't necessarily a dislike, but more of an unsure. This is a slight character spoiler, so some of you might want to skip ahead to the next section to avoid being spoiled. Alright? Gone? Good. So Xysis is back. The dragon we met in Tress of the Emerald Sea, and he's no longer in a sort of playful story of Hoids. It's what I consider the real Xysis without the embellishment. In Tress, he was introduced as sort of a benevolent dragon that kind of served as this greater good for the people who would join him, and in return they would be taken care of and have all of their needs met or even healed from pains and sicknesses. I saw him as more of a force for good. However, in this book we meet him and he comes off as more of a sleazy businessman. He's all about making deals rather than helping people. In other words, he only wants to help if it only profits him. I don't know, I don't hate it, it's just like, it just took the character in a different direction than I thought previously. I'm open to it though. Ultimately, I want to see where Xysis goes from here. Audiobook voices. Audiobook fans, if you aren't much of a physical reader and you're worried about the new voices distracting you here, I have thoughts. Ripping the band-aid off, no, Michael Kramer and Kate Redding's voice are not in this book. While I love physical reading, I also enjoy listening along with audiobooks, especially when I'm driving or cleaning around the house, and I was missing Michael and Kate's voices. But I just want to assure you that Kaleo and Jennifer do a fantastic job narrating this book, and I hope I pronounced his name right. I honestly felt like their voices fit the characters perfectly, and after a while, I didn't even notice that Kate and Michael weren't the ones reading. Whereas, contrast, whenever I was listening to The Sunlit Man, I did not have that same feeling. I thought the voice actor in Sunlit Man did a good job, but he was reading for well-known characters, and it was really hard for me to listen to him voice someone like Sigzil or Hoyd in that book. In Isles of the Emberdark, we mostly have a new set of characters, so there was never really a distraction for me listening of, oh, that's not what this character should sound like. They're all new characters, really aside from Dusk and Vathi. In closing, the story on its own without the lore expansion is great. It's right up there with Yumi and the Nightmare Painter and Tress of the Emerald Sea, but it is the lore that really sets it up higher for me on the ranking list. Don't get me wrong, Emberdark is not Stormlight, it's not Mistborn, but if you are a fan of the Cosmere, then you will find much enjoyment from this book. While the book isn't a full-on emotional ride on the levels of Mistborn and Stormlight, it still had me smiling and wanting to read more. All in all, did it keep me entertained? Yes. Did I feel something while reading this book? Also yes. So I would say if Mistborn for me is a 5-star, then I would comfortably put Isles of the Emberdark at 4. But anyway, those are my thoughts. If you like this video, please give it a like and feel free to subscribe to the channel for more reviews and story breakdowns. Later.